in the last 10 years, every month, 3 churches have closed in the Episcopal Church, in the Presbyterian Church, in the Methodist Church, in the Roman Catholic Church. All the mainline denominations are having this struggle with their buildings. And basically the issue is that their buildings were built in a previous generation. And very generous congregations like St. Stephen's just can't have enough money to support the property. So I've had personal experiences with parishes in Kansas and in Rochester where there'll be a congregation of about 50 people in a sanctuary that fits 1,000 people. So as generous as those 50 people are, they cannot support the congregation. And the result is there are a lot of people suffering. There are a lot of people suffering in churches, in parishes that no one is attending to. And people in parishes are doing their best to keep these parishes going, and they think that there's no opportunity to close it. It's just sinful to close churches, really. That's a horrible thing. No one wants to do it. And there's no support nationwide for this. Bishop Catherine just had a press conference in Pittsburgh, and she said that the church will probably be cut in half in the next 15 to 20 years. And as congregations open, that many of them will not be tied to church buildings. So that's the broad context of our conversation this morning, and why you're here, and why it's important for you to tell your story. It's an act of pastoral care for people who are sitting in congregations today who think that they have no choice. And so you are sharing your story as teachers and as pastors.
I was in a unique situation because I was serving the parish as a priest, but I was also able to serve on the vestry. And having accepted that position with the vestry, we went into into a planning stage of what was ahead for the parish. And the more information that we found out about our history and our situation, I don't know if it was a moment of realization, but I think it was a gradual realization by all members of the parish that we were facing something that we had not anticipated, which was the closing of the place. When did I know? I suspected that there were pretty deep problems in the church when one of the priests violated his trust with the congregation. After I'd been there about 5 years, he was someone that I had a lot of respect for, and he had a lot of respect in the church and in the community, and he violated that trust in such a way that it was undeniable and absolutely a contradiction to the principles of the church, and from my perspective, principles of the community. And yet there were members in the community who weren't sure if it was okay or not. So that made me kind of wonder. And then several years later, when I got on the vestry, I saw many of the same people doing many of the same things, even though those things often didn't work well. And I thought, not sure how long this can go on. And then I started to see that there were kind of the same few people doing a lot of the work. and not many new people coming in. It was kind of unique that people did.
I had been coming to St. Stephens about over 17 years, and I noticed somewhere 10 years ago that there just weren't as many people. There weren't as many, there were a lot of older folks who had gone, who had passed, and it didn't seem like their children were coming or their children's children. And I thought, what we need are more people. And it was kind of an awakening, because in our community, as you look around this town, there are a lot of people reaching out to find God. They're looking for Him in grocery stores. They're looking for Him in schools. They have services now in the Elks Club. I mean, people have somebody with a message, and there are people out there who want to hear it. And so they will seek that person or that thing that they want to hear, that makes them feel connected to God and the big life. I had conversations with people that said, well, perhaps what we need is somebody to go out and recruit Episcopalians, and I don't know quite how you do that. So I didn't take that on myself, but it was sad to see it happen.
I knew that it was going to be the end of St. Stephens for me before I knew it was going to be the end for the rest of the parish. After 13 years as a volunteer priest, I was exhausted. And I could feel myself pulling away into new ministry areas and much more time with my family. And the fact that it began to dawn on us that this was going to be the closing of the parish brought me a great sense of relief, because I felt like I would not have to face the feelings of abandoning the parish to its future. So when it became apparent, both as a priest and as a vestry member, that we were going to close our doors, I embraced that 6 months in the process, and it did become a massive celebration. And one of the most emotional times I've ever experienced.
The question of when I knew, in retrospect, you have to say long ago. We had been on a downhill slide, trying to hold the level, thinking about something magic that would bring us up. So I think I wasn't actually surprised.
I think I knew a long time ago, too, as someone else has said. I think I began to know when we had a big crisis and had to make a change as we were going through the years that we did the total ministry kind of thing. And it was, other churches don't seem to have to do that. And about the second time you change and try to say, well, let's bring something in, maybe if we do this, maybe if we have a conference, that sort of thing. It started coming to me even a long time ago that, well, maybe this wasn't good. This wasn't going to make it. But I continued to hope, even though I began to suspect that things were in trouble. And you do hope the next time that you reevaluate that something will come on. But I think I knew at least 15 years ago that this probably would not be the church that I ended up in, even though that's what I wanted with all my whole heart.
The first time I knew on a purely intellectual basis was at a vestry meeting when I was presented with, here's where we are. The facts were not wonderful. It was very clear that there was no sustainable way to keep this group of people together long term.
I knew a long time ago when I began teaching Sunday school, I was teaching my own children and just a few other children. We simply weren't growing. And I knew that we could not develop. I knew that my mother and father-in-law were going to a very large congregation, and they had thousands of people. They had hundreds of children that went to this evangelical Christian church, and I knew that that's where people were going, and I knew that we couldn't sustain. Did I ever give up? No. I actually feel like I became more involved in what I was doing with St. Stephens, and I felt that I was giving as much as I could, but I also knew that we couldn't sustain. It wasn't a surprise to me when we all met that afternoon, and it was told to us that the church would be closing. I was not at all surprised.
I think the guy accepted the idea that they were closing St. Stephens when they said it was over. I was very good at denial. Do the roses, move some rocks, and I kept that up, and I handled it with anger, and with the corporate church and bishops, and setting up mission churches when we needed people, and I went from there to a little easier attitude as it went on.
I started getting suspicious about our closing when the Sunday school was almost becoming extinct because we had no children. We had a few kids that would show up, but some Sundays we weren't able to have Sunday school. And I kind of thought, then looking over the congregation, I didn't see any young families there. We were just kind of a lot of seniors, and of course there were some that weren't seniors like me, but I just kind of thought of just kind of a very slow curve dropping down, and I kind of, what really I think got the ball rolling for me was when we opened up another parish, and several people from our parish started going to the other parish because of maybe the location was different or something, but that kind of gave me an inkling too of things to come.
When I came back to came to St. Stephens, it was a revelation because it was such a active, friendly, lively church. This was only about 4 or 5 years ago. But of course, it became clear that we were struggling within, a few years ago, a couple of years ago. And so, as far as I was concerned, you could see it. I didn't believe it, but you could see it when it was pointed out by the vestry and other leaders.
I can remember walking in the halls and seeing pictures from before and seeing kids that were my age, lined up outside the church when I was really small, and thinking, I've seen all these kids grow up and now they're gone, and there were days when I would be the only kid or only person under 20 or so there, and it was kind of, lonesome, but still it was like a family.
I think what was hard for me was kind of knowing it was inevitable, and yet having to be really patient while people found a way to see it and to recognize it and to accept it, and then knowing that some people just weren't going to be able to go there until the doors didn't open again.
What was hard was when we actually got the word that it was going to happen. It was hard because what I had seen in the last year was a turnaround of our attitude that, yeah, we needed something more than what we were doing. The ministries were good that we did, but they weren't recruiting people. It was, that part was hard, and when we got the word that we had to close, that was very hard, because we kind of like, what do we do now? What do I do now? Where am I going to fit in? So you have to make that journey from one spot to the next. You have to go to the other churches that are out there. Are they going to give me the same message, the same lessons that I need to know, the same feel good in the bottom of my heart that I need for my soul?
We were in the process of what can we do? How can we re-stimulate? How can we grow? When it became quickly apparent that it wasn't going to make it. Just we started to gather facts, the demographics, the situation. It started to become clear to people on the vestry that what we thought we were doing wasn't what we were going to wind up doing. Yet we labeled it one thing. So there was a problem of continuing a process that was beginning but not quite announced with our parish sessions that was going to have to turn into this other process in the meantime. And that part was hard. It's not quite like there's a secret where I'm holding a secret, but you really couldn't quite announce early in the game, oh fudge, we aren't going to make this. You had to, bring yourself, bring other people on the vestry, have them realize and see what the process was telling us. That part was hard.
I had been in this church for 44 years. My children had been baptized in that church. I had a second marriage. I was married again in that church. My parents were buried from that church. I had a lot going on there that was my whole life, and I am someone who likes churches. So it was my whole life in many ways, and it was hard.
The first thought that came to me that was hard was, I cannot lose this group of individuals that I love and that have been part of my life for 23 years, who supported me through a very difficult time in my life, who supported me in my marriage to Bill and the baptism of my granddaughter, and celebrated the joys and the sorrows, and feels to me like a very wonderful and unique group of individuals.
I feel as though in my life there's been a lot of death. And so my ability to cope with the closing of our church, I liken to losing a parent, a grandparent. And it's a building. Why would I feel that way? And trying to rationalize that didn't work. I think just knowing that this fellowship of family, friends, and everything in between is gone.
For me, it was very simple to go to another Episcopal parish. Walked in there, and here were some old friends that we had become, that we were acquainted with from years before, that we had kind of lost contact with. And it was kind of like oh, what have you been doing the last 40 years or so, or something like that.
As I say, it was a wonderful church and a wonderful bunch of people to be with. It's just a real revelation to me. And, you know, like taking part of you away and losing it, as many of the others have said just now.
We were always really close, and I think that was probably the hardest thing for me, was realizing myself that it wasn't going to be just that anymore. I mean, I can remember feeling a loss kind of, because every Sunday I would go to see these people, you know, smiling faces that I knew, and they weren't going to be there anymore. I had to move on, find something new.
I think it was extremely hard to do the closure well and to do it properly and to allow everybody their chance to grieve, to express their denial and their options, however crazy sometimes, for keeping the church open. It was difficult to sit in meetings with the parish and listen to the sadness and the anger and sometimes the accusations of the leadership selling out the parish in one way or another. And you go through this about a 6-month process, and you think you've kind of done your own grieving and you've done your own processing and listened to everybody else. And then you realize that there are some faces here that you're not going to see again, maybe. And the last 2 services that we did at St. Stephens were very, very emotional for me. And I wept openly because, and it wasn't for the church, it was for the people. What surprised me was the extent of what we didn't know about our situation. We had done a lot of processing as a parish about our history and some of the things that had gone wrong in the past and had affected the way things were operating currently in the parish. People that we lost, people, various indiscretions and things like that. But when we actually began to look into the history of why St. Stephens was placed where it was, what the logic, if there was any, of putting a church there, and the realities of living out an experiment in total ministry or mutual ministry where almost no positions are paid, and just to realize just how depleted what I called our bench strength was in terms of leadership. That was an unhappy surprise. A happy surprise that I have seen since then is, I would say, the ease with which most of St. Stephens' membership has found a new home in a different Episcopal parish. And I think that accounts for most of our membership. So the idea that this is a larger spiritual community than perhaps any of us realized is a good thing.
What surprised me was how quickly people adapted once the facts were on the table and people saw what was possible and what was not possible, and that there really weren't any other options long term. And the seeds that we had tried to plant for years for long-term growth and development just hadn't sprouted. And many of them that had sprouted had not grown. We tried to nourish them and they just wouldn't go. And so it surprised me that people, once they saw the writing on the wall, they went, well, what's next? It was very powerful because it was like, these are people that really care a lot about each other and a lot about the church. And part of it was about the location, but for what I saw was that most of it was really about the community.
What surprised me is the absolute empathy that all of the parishioners had for one another. They cared, they hugged, they told stories that I hadn't heard before. I had been there over 10 years.
What surprised me was the relief that when it did get announced, I mean, there was that day where three of us were sitting there and clearly we're not going to be open. There's freedom in that. And the surprise that I felt in the gift of, at a certain point we said, here's where we're going to quit. We have time between now and then to celebrate the time we have had together. What a gift.
What surprised me about what happened was the fact that, well, not the fact that I didn't feel anger, because I didn't feel anger, but I'm not someone who feels a lot of anger. That's not my go-to. But how angry some people were. And I think that's important to recognize, because when a church is closing, you are dealing with people who react with anger. You're dealing with people who act with sadness. And all of those are valid things. And you must cope with them. As much as I couldn't understand anger, did not mean that it wasn't there. And that we needed to help people through that and to honor it.
What surprised me was in the process of closure, we became the community that I had always wanted to have us become, that of becoming integral parts of each other's lives and joys and sorrows and angers, and how much we all mattered to each other.
My inability to commit to another congregation. So I'm sorry. That has surprised me. Where my parents are comfortable, I'm not comfortable. So I don't know why that surprises me, but it does.
What surprised me was when somebody said, it's all right, you're an Episcopalian. And I wasn't. I was a member of St. Stephens. And that kind of surprised me.
It totally hit me at one point. It was like, wow. Because all those years, and I had seen the pictures, and I had watched the people, it was kind of there, but I wasn't really accepting it. And then my mom tells me, oh yeah, St. Stephens is closing, and it was kind of, bam, right there in your face. It's not going to be there for that much longer.
The main lesson I got was just a reminder. I came into the church because old friends of mine, I've been out of it for 40 years, and old friends of mine said, maybe you need a community of faith to be a part of. And so I came into the church that way, and what I learned was that community didn't live in that church. That community lives all over the world.
Things do have their own life cycles. There is a beginning and an end to things. And that ultimately what happened to St. Stephens doesn't have to be viewed as a failure, but as a completion. We were given a task 20 or 25 years ago to live this idea out as a parish, and I think we did it admirably. And I think, again, with the process we went through, there was a lot of argument about saving the building, and that the building was the most important thing to consider. I think we came to the realization that that simply isn't true. There is a much bigger picture in terms of the Episcopal Church, and certainly in terms of what God is doing in the world. And I can feel, I think in my gut, that people have come to understand that a little bit better. This isn't God, this is God.
I think that religion and love of God and your neighbor is an important message from our lessons. And I think that those are important lessons to learn. And what I would want to share with another person who asked me what happened, I would say everything that happens is important. If you're a human being and you're walking on the earth, everything you do is important.
The lesson that I learned was a bit of what is. And we very quickly got over the flogging ourselves that we could have done more. I could give more. But to come to the realization that everybody there was participating at their fullest level, was giving at their highest level, and that we had really turned a corner maybe 15 years ago. It wasn't somebody who left last month, and if that one family was back, things would be okay at St. Stephens. That wasn't true at all. And that's a good thing to learn for me, just in my life view.
I learned some lessons about how some of the pride that I had had in what we had accomplished at St. Stephens was indeed that, just maybe even a false pride, that when I went around and looked at other churches and decided, trying to find where we would go, my husband and I did that, and we felt that that was a thing we needed to do so that we wouldn't pull out of somewhere else, that wherever we went, we'd stay, was how different we really were. We thought we were a group there that felt the same way, but a lot of people didn't want to go where I wanted to go. And but one of the things I thought we did, a lot of us, is we left with honor. We honored what we were, and we tried to do what was good and kind and decent as we left.
The lesson to be shared, I think, is that I knew that we were in a difficult place, but closure was not, in my mind, an option. It was outside the realm of possibility, but that was because we were all holding the place together, and I felt that I could not stop. If I stopped, it would stop, and that was not possible. So what I've learned since then is that the stopping of St. Stephens, the ending of St. Stephens, means that I can be part of a parish, even though it doesn't feel like as much of a community. I can be part of a parish without feeling like I can't lose a step, that I have to make it work, that I can be in a parish, be part of a worshiping community without feeling like my choices make it or break it.
I found when I went to my parents' church on Easter Sunday, I was pleasantly surprised at the end of the church. I had this feeling of realization that does it matter where I worship as long as we're together? Probably not. But it's still difficult. So I do want to share that you have to find the right place. You have to find somewhere, because it's not going to find you. You might in the beginning get letters and phone calls and things like that, but it's not you have to make the effort. You can't assume that someone's going to say, hey, come on over, and call you back and continue to want you to come, because that's not going to happen. You have to make the effort to do that.
I remember somebody saying once that the presence of a church is maybe the proof of its failure as a religion, because there was nothing in there about a building. And God knows our building had problems. And so in the word of koinonia, of fellowship, we really had that. Here we go. And so you go to another church, and somebody said, if you work at it, there are people there just as hungry to accept you as you're looking for acceptance. And it's hard. It surprises you. And none of us like something new unless we choose to do it first, not when it's foisted on us. And I don't think you need to have a tie to a building or a particular faith even, but the fellowship is probably what's going to get you through. And if you search for that, you'll come out ahead.
Face the future, with courage and with confidence that it's going to be better, or at least as good as it has been. I don't think I could really ever equal what we had in St. Stephens, but I think that everyone can move on and make a successful future, and don't be too afraid. That's my message.
It is a family. Every church is its own little family, and I have experienced more churches, and it's a different family, but it's still close. You know the people there, and when one church breaks up, it's a doorway to another church.
One of the things that was, for me, definitely did get crystallized at one of our parish meetings was we took a look at how we would look if we were a vibrant church rather than we were surviving. For a long time we'd sort of stayed at survival level. And it's when we dropped below that everybody said, oh, the writing's been on the wall. But we hadn't sat back and thought, okay, what would it take? And we defined being a vibrant parish in our area that it would take, 120 pledging families. This means you've got youth, you have the young, you have the old, you have energy, you have enough people to be able to have some on the bench, return into function. But one was just to realize what is needed to be a vibrant church, because that's what I think we are asked to be. And yes, a building can get in the way of being a vibrant church, but also if there are too many churches, fewer of them might be now vibrant.
When we began this process, I came upon a book that was written by a Quaker called If the Church Were Christian. And one of the chapter titles is, If the Church Were Christian, Human Needs Would Be More Important Than Maintaining Institutions. And that spoke to me very powerfully.